The category is What the Trans, darling?
Well, hello, and welcome to What the Trans.
What the trans? We still exist. We're still a thing.
We still exist, and we are back after an extended, slightly more extended than we intended break. But we're back because it's time, essentially. We hope everybody has been coping with COVID world as well as you might expect. And to, obviously, the many, many members of our trans audience, we hope you've been managing to cope okay with all of the other stuff that's been happening as well, some of which we will be talking about today. But before that, Michelle, darling, wonderful to speak to you. How have you been?
Well, I've been all right. I mean, last few months for me have been a bit weird because I've bought Tamagotchis. Multiple.
Wow.
I have 2 of them, Pinko and Commie.
Love it.
Although Pinko did die last night, so I should really hatch a new egg there. But yeah, because I live in a flat in London, it's very hard to have pets. People do it. People have cats and stuff, but I'm not really a cat person because cats demand, well, you have to earn their respect.
You do,
and
don't
I
you?
don't have any of the patience or will to even begin to try and earn the respect of a fucking cat who just goes out the house and murders everything in sight, then comes in and asks for more food. What a bunch of dickheads.
Okay.
If I get cancelled for anything, it'll be because of my view on cats. I don't like cats
Fair
as
enough.
a thing. So I went with the only other real option that wasn't a goldfish that I could get away with in my flat, which was...
Tamagotchi.
Yeah, and they're great.
Yeah.
They have died a few times, screaming in piles of their own shit because I've forgotten they've existed. But that's what I've been doing to get through all this COVID nonsense. So how about you? You haven't been on a pod for a very long time.
No.
What have you been up to?
Oh, God. So I think if I was to be diplomatic, I would say I've had some stuff to deal with. And if I was being perfectly honest, I would say I've had some slightly difficult things to deal with in my life, and obviously the pandemic has been affecting mental health for lots of people, including myself. However, last time I was on the pod, I seem to recall, as I do so often, whinging about not having a job. That has changed, I am delighted to say. I have actually managed to now pick up a bit of work for an LGBT charity here in Manchester. And it's, if nothing else, it's giving me something to do while I try and pursue, kind of help me cope, having something to concentrate on rather than just this big listless void of when the hell is this going to end. But for now, here I am. I'm back. Although it's got to be said, actually, I am at the moment, as we record this, I'm a bit ill. I've got all sorts of stomach faff, so I have just been drinking lots of water, wrapping myself in blankets, and playing a lot of New Vegas.
I will say, your little story sounds a lot more adult than mine. Like, you've had some tough times, but you've got a job, and you're doing actual things for alive people.
Yeah.
I'm up at midnight screaming, why do you keep shitting, Pinko? Why do you keep shitting? It's just endless shitting.
Fair
So
enough.
I think that's very, very on brand for us.
It
You
is.
are the one who tends to go out and do the good things. But I'm sorry you're unwell.
It's all right. I mean, it happens. I mean, it's not COVID, thankfully, but funnily enough, people can still get ill with other things during a pandemic, and unfortunately, I seem to be having some digestive problems, which I am sure our listeners do not want me to go into. So,
If you would like to hear more about Ashleigh's digestive issues, please hit us up on the Twitter. We'll put up a poll straight after recording to see if that's what the next episode is going to be about. Of course, that is a flat-out joke
we're
and a
not doing
lie,
that.
because the next 2 episodes, we have a specific thing in mind. Because, I mean, we've really set ourselves up for failure here, because our first episodes back are going to be about possibly the biggest and quite most complicated thing this pod has ever tried to cover. So, you know, let's throw our hat over the wall and see how well we
get on.
So this episode, we've got an interview with Jolyon Maugham, QC barrister type from the Good Law Project, who has set up, along with the Good Law Project, the Trans Legal Defence Fund. And his involvement in the episode will become clearer as we dive into the terrible news, which I think there's only one thing we can cover for our first episode back at, because when we went on hiatus, possibly the worst thing that could have happened did happen.
Missed that one, didn't we?
So here is the deal to bring you up to speed on what the fuck just happened. So the full story is that the Bell versus Tavistock judgment landed in early December, and the results were not great. The judges ruled in the decision that under 16s are incapable of giving consent for puberty blockers, in spite of the fact that that under 16 seem to be very capable of deciding on a whole other bunch of medical procedures that could be lifelong and just as much of a thing. But whatever, we'll not get too angry about that yet.
I'm going to save that.
But how the fuck did this happen? Well, here's the deal. Between 2004 and 2007, Susan Evans was a nurse who worked part-time for the Gender Identity Development Service, or GIDS for short, which operates out of the Tavistock Clinic in London. 12 years after leaving the service, in late 2019, Evans created a crowdfunding campaign on crowd justice entitled, in all caps, "Legal Case to Protect Children from Experimental Medical Treatment." I think you have to read it like that when it's all caps, right? Like, that's kind of the tone of how it was written, I'm assuming.
Absolutely. It's the same as if you're reading something that's quite definitely in inverted commas. You can kind of hear the capital letters clanging into place, can't you?
Yeah. The goal of the quote-unquote legal case was to challenge GID's apparent rush towards accepting the identities of trans children and rushing them towards HRT, which anyone who has learned anything about the Tavistock Clinic and GID specifically will be the biggest joke in the world, considering it can take up to 3 years to get a first appointment there. Also involved in the case was Mrs. A, an anonymous parent of an autistic child who was seeking transition, and apparently wanted to stop that from happening. So Mrs. A...
What a good parent.
Yeah, parent of the fucking year, Mrs. A. Don't know who you are, you're anonymous. Hope you're listening. But yeah, not a fan of your work. Early last year, Evans swapped herself out of the case for Kira Bell, which was a smart move because Evans waited for 12 years to rush on this emergency about experimental medical treatment before doing anything about it, seemingly waiting until the media would have taken the most interest possible when they started a moral campaign against trans people. But that's just me being cynical. That can't possibly be it.
No, that couldn't possibly be the case.
So she swapped herself out for Kira Bell, a woman who had detransitioned after, according to Kira Bell's words, she believed she would never be the man she wanted to be and had discovered gender-critical writings and thinkers who subsequently influenced her decision to detransition. Which, we know what that sounds like. There's a phrase for it, but I'm not going to say it because these people are very litigious. But there's a phrase that I'm thinking of that I know that everyone else is thinking, and I'm just going to leave that
I'm just going to jump in and say the fact is somebody's decision to detransition should be their own decision and based on their own circumstances and their own needs. Somebody starting trans treatment and then deciding it isn't for them and then quote-unquote detransitioning is something that is perfectly valid and something that needs to be supported not just by the trans community but by the NHS and the medical community at large. Detransition is a genuine thing which, unfortunately, like so many elements of this case, is being weaponized against the trans community.
Yeah, we've got to do an episode on this because there are detransitioners out there who have basically been radicalized and conversion therapied by gender-critical people. That's a thing that is very much happening. But we'll do that in another episode.
We will get to that, yes.
But months and months went by, and between two different crowd justice campaigns between Kira Bell and Susan Evans, who was somehow weirdly involved in the case, even though she wasn't named in it. Don't know what her role was. Bit weird. But between them, they raised nearly £150,000 over the last 12 months. On both crowd justice campaigns, they name Sinclair's Law as the firm representing them, and in media reports leading up to the review itself, we were introduced to Paul Conrath. Paul Conrath is already infamous for his work in combating assisted dying and abortion in the UK. He is name-checked in a report by Dignity in Dying, an assisted dying campaign group, as essentially an ideologue who works with various Christian groups to impose his Christian fundamentalist will on the UK. Yeah, he's interesting. I'll provide all the links on the link sheet as usual so you can look up a history of all of the cases he's been involved with, but to give you a brief summary, he has a history of taking on clients that use crowd justice to finance his personal mission, and he's represented homophobic parents who sought to stop LGBT-inclusive sex and relationship education in Birmingham in 2019. He's represented various people seeking to erode abortion access. And he's also been involved in various cases for the Safe Schools Alliance, another anti-trans pressure group, quote-unquote. and was also there for the fair cop Harry the Owl case that occurred last year. Basically, this guy has a history of working with prime turfs of the UK in various legal cases, and is also incredibly linked to various groups, including the Alliance Defending Freedom, at least through people that he knows, and the Heritage Foundation, sort of less so, but still there are vague connections there. He's very well into the evangelical Christian world, and yeah, he's a very interesting choice for apparently a feminist such as Kira Bell to give him, well, £150,000 worth of money. Although not all of that money gone to him, obviously. There was a whole team of people on their team, but you know what I'm saying. I think it's safe to say that Paul Conrath was probably offering more for his services than just legal services, but we'll get to that later.
And it's obviously just worth pointing out that the Alliance Defending Freedom and the Heritage Foundation are, of course, both American right-wing evangelical organisations who are getting their tendrils into the social fabric of the UK, which is a cause for concern on a number of levels.
Especially because the Alliance Defending Freedom are literally a Southern Poverty Law Centre designated hate group who worked with the Trump administration last year in the Supreme Court to try and stop LGBT employment discrimination protections from being a thing across the whole country. That's who they are. They are Trump
As we
people.
reported on at the time, in fact. So, during this period of time, as this is all coming together, many organisations have attempted to intervene in the case. An intervention in a judicial review are where interested parties can jump into a judicial review and give evidence, either orally or written. Now, I think it's important for us to note here that Transgender Trend, another quite definitely UK-based anti-trans hate group, were allowed to intervene, but registered charities Stonewall and Mermaids were both turned down. Fascinating. Now, the legal case that they sought was something called a judicial review, as I've just mentioned. Now, the goal of a judicial review is to have a judge decide on the lawfulness of a decision or an action made by a public body. In this case, the public body is, of course, the Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust, the NHS Trust which runs the Tavistock Clinic and subsequently the GIDS services. So in the end, I'm pretty sure most of our listeners are going to know the result. On the 2nd of December, 2 months after the 2-day hearing was held, the decision was released. The judges had decided that under-16s could not give informed consent in regards to accepting puberty blockers for gender identity-related issues. And those aged 16 to 17 may not be able to either. So far, this has resulted in GIDS halting all referrals to endocrinology, whilst young people are now facing having to not only persuade parents of their healthcare needs, then patiently wait for potentially years to get a first appointment, then spend months convincing GIDS doctors that they are serious and then getting that doctor to sign off. They now also have to persuade a judge so that they can get the puberty blocker medicine. Now, for specifics on precisely what that will entail, that is something that we will be covering in next week's episode. But for the moment, this is where we're at. There has been a legal decision that under 16s, and interestingly only under 16 trans children, or trans youngsters, are not what is referred to as Gillick competent and cannot meaningfully consent to medical treatment.
So here's the thing. Well, I've read the judgment a few times now, and I want to put out there that I am not a legal expert. In fact, I'm going to be straight up honest. In all my years of doing journalism stuff for places this, I have never really covered courts. I've covered Parliament stuff. I learned how to do that when I was at Pink News. I've covered the trans community. I've learned how to do that while doing this. But I've never covered court. I have no idea where I'm starting. I've read a few judgments in the past. I know roughly what court is where in the hierarchy of courts. But that's it. So saying that straight up, what stood out from the judgment was that the argument that it wasn't about Gillick competence seemed to come from the idea that puberty blockers, their long-term effects are unknown, when in fact...
That's not true.
They're kind
That's
of not.
not true at all.
Yeah, Well, it is partially true in that they don't know about the psychological effects 30 years down the line. But the thing is, there's so many medications where they don't know the psychological effects 30 years down the line that they could use that same argument against. Their argument was that if somebody took puberty blockers for a few months, that could have repercussions 30 years down the line if they decide that being trans isn't for them. But also the interesting thing from the decision is that they seem to take the evidence that almost 100% of the children who took blockers went on to take hormone replacement therapy or cross-sex hormones, which they used as an example of puberty blockers resulting in people choosing to do that. Whereas there's the total other side of it, which is it makes sense because trans kids tend to want to take fucking hormones at the end of things. That is also a possibility that didn't seem to be brought up by anyone in the judgment. Obviously, the way that, like, the judgment I'm going to keep referring to is like a 40-page document. There'll be a link to it. You can read the whole thing yourself, and I encourage you to do so.
If your mental health is appropriately robust, I would say.
Yes, if you have a good strong mental health thing going on, give it a read. I highly encourage you to do so because you will learn a lot, or in my case, possibly misunderstand a lot of it. But basically, the argument was that they can't give consent because they can't conceptualize fully what the effects will be because the effects are unknown. But the thing with the case, there was a 2-day hearing that I did not go to, but I know people who did, and the impression that they got and told me about was that they felt that the issue had been decided before the hearing had started.
Shocker.
Yeah, like they were both sort of the only ones who were kind of on the pro-trans side ideologically, but they were just surrounded by people who were all there saying, oh, this is good, yeah, this is finally being heard. And the judges didn't seem to, and the Tavistock side of things, the GIDS side, or specifically the Tavistock and Portland Trust, they didn't have a lot of the things the judge was asking for. And in the judgment, there are many times where the judge writes, I'm surprised the Tavistock don't have this information. As in, the Tavistock appeared to be totally unprepared for this, and possibly there may have been hubris in that they didn't believe that there was a chance in hell that this could happen.
Possibly.
Or it was just that they are just not very good, which I think most people know. The Tavistock is god-awful, but not for all the reasons that TERFs and GC people think. It's because they're not very good at giving healthcare to trans kids. Like, I've talked to parents who have been telling me that their kid was put through menopause because the Tavistock screwed them up.
Yeah.
You know, like, not giving them puberty blockers early enough in some cases. In a lot of cases, most cases.
Yeah. And that's something that there's a whole thing here, which I think you definitely touched on in the interview with Joe from the Good Law Project a little bit later on. But it does seem that there are definitely problems and issues with the Tavistock, but not the ones that these people are focusing on. So, as we mentioned, an organisation called Transgender Trend intervened in the case. And this is, I raise this specifically because it relates to your comment that looks like things were decided beforehand. So Transgender Trend, quick history, founded by a woman named Stephanie Davis-Arai, who claims to be an expert in trans children, but according to her LinkedIn, her qualification is in just the one thing, which is sculpting.
And for the record, she has 3 fucking LinkedIn profiles, which is totally normal. That's a normal thing for a person to have, 3 LinkedIns. For people who don't know what LinkedIn is, it's basically like Facebook for CVs. Yeah, that's basically what it is. And she's got 3 CVs, and all of them are a bit different from each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's on the fucking level, isn't she? But anyway, sorry,
the point is, I think we definitely wanted to question their expertise, because considering that Transgender Trend's entire reason for being is to advocate conversion therapy on young trans people, which is absolutely evidenced in nearly all of their output, so their contribution to the judgment itself is not mentioned beyond the fact that they were there, but it is very interesting to me that they got let in and allowed to contribute while organisations such as Stonewall and Mermaids were not. Talking again about the Alliance Defending Freedom, another interesting thing is 2 of the named witnesses who gave evidence and that were actually referenced in the judgment document have a documentable history of working with the Alliance Defending Freedom, the Southern Poverty Law Centre determined hate group who we most recently talked about when we were talking about the Supreme Court proceedings over LGBT employment protections last year that we mentioned earlier on. The Alliance Defending Freedom are anti-LGBT in a way that is genuinely kind of terrifying. And according to the Southern Poverty Law Centre, Professor Paul Ruse is one of a few who make up a group of these quote-unquote expert witnesses the ADF can provide readily in cases aimed at hobbling LGBT equality, such as a case like this one. So this chap, Professor Paul, he is an endocrinologist, so he does have some medical experience, but his specialism is in diabetes. He doesn't really appear to have any experience with gender dysphoria, and certainly very much appears to be a rather orthodox Christian, which is not necessarily a problem in itself, but it might be if that orthodoxy is influencing the work that he is doing. In January last year, 2020, Cruz, along with Credo, a St. Louis-based Orthodox Catholic pressure group, held an event called Sex and Gender in Light of Truth, Beauty and Goodness. And at that time, Pride St. Louis released the following statement. Dr. Paul Cruz, MD, PhD, and Associate Professor of Pediatrics and Associate Professor of Cellular Biology and Physiology at St. Louis's Washington University of Medicine. Gosh, these people have so many titles. Believes that children are being harmed by transgender treatments. Dr. Cruz also warns the public that child transgender therapy is harmful and quote-unquote poor science. Yeah, like he'd know. Dr. Cruz proclaims that when gender treatment enters in, the natural process is disrupted, causing lifelong damage, and when most children experiencing gender confusion eventually work it through on their own. Claims we have heard and debunked many, many times before. So Dr. Cruz has been on several television programs, radio shows, and lecture series disseminating this ideology and belief. Again, I'm fascinated that this is a guy who is a scientist who works within diabetes and various other medical processes, but then saying, oh, no, that treatment, that's not natural. You know, well, so the natural thing to do would be to not intervene medically for anything and let people die really young. But he's decided that science is okay, but all the evidence with reference to trans people and LGBT people is not okay, and that should be robustly fought.
There is another quote that comes from a report from Planet Transgender last year, when a member of their team contacted the Washington University to get some information on Professor Haruz. They said Dr. Haruz is not a member of our DSD team, nor is he an expert in transgender health, as he has never taken care of a transgender person. Dr. Haruz admits that he has not treated any transgender patients with gender dysphoria, conducted peer-reviewed research about gender identity, transgender people, or gender dysphoria, and is not a psychiatrist, a psychologist, nor mental health care provider of any kind who could speak knowledgeably of transgender health.
So in what way is he an expert?
Well, his evidence was given equal measure with the evidence provided by the endocrinology team that the Tavistock go through. The kids go through. And I feel that may not have been the best decision for getting the best, most right judgment out of this case, because the man is clearly an ideologue who has jumped into this and using his professor/doctor credits to get ahead, and has offered himself up to a goddamn hate group to be their little, oh, you needed somebody with doctor and the whole professor in their title to give evidence in your thing against gay people or trans people or anyone. Mm-hmm. This is your guy.
It's the argument from authority, isn't it? And we see it a lot, and it's like, oh, well, no, what we're saying is legit. Look, we have a professor. And then you look into it, and the professor is usually somebody that doesn't have any qualification in anything relevant, and is often, as is precisely the case here, somebody who is, as you say, an ideologue, who is motivated not by their belief that scientific knowledge should be disseminated and acted upon. It's somebody who has got an idea of how things should be done and is going to stick with that no matter what anybody else and what the evidence may say. So this combination of things and people is extremely problematic, but it is, unfortunately, we are not done yet.
Yeah, Stephen Levine is another witness who gave evidence, and yeah, same, much the same. He's very much the same as Professor Paul Haruz. Yet he is deeply not what I would call a good person, in my personal opinion. He appears to have a certain dogma that he is trying to impose on everyone, which, yeah, not ideal.
So closer to home, and somebody not involved with the Alliance Defending Freedom, but was still very much on their side of the argument, Professor Sophie Scott, who gave evidence on why she does not believe young people have the capacity to consent to blockers, even though, according to her own page on her employer's website, she has no history of dealing with trans youth, trans anything, blockers anything. She is employed by University College London's Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience and specifically studies how brains process speech, which doesn't, to me, sound like anything to do with consent, blockers, trans healthcare, psychology, or any of the things that you would expect an expert voice in a case like this to actually be able to say.
No, she is another person who seems to have a very, very credentialed history who is ideologically opposed to trans young people, and possibly even trans people in general. I don't know, I haven't confirmed that. But when I was going through the judgment, I was Googling every name that was named in it. And several times a thread came up by Jolyon Maugham, where he went through a list of all of the witnesses being called. But yeah, Jolyon Maugham has been on this from the start, it seems like, because his tweets were the first things that came up most of the time. So there was another 5 witnesses that we didn't get into here because they weren't directly mentioned in the judgment, but we will link to that thread. It is fascinating.
It certainly is, and that's what got us onto thinking, well, perhaps this is a person we should speak to.
Yeah. Before we get to our conversation with Mr. Maugham, I think the point needs to be made that there is 2 people who have a history of working with a hate group that are directly referenced in this judgment and given equal measure and given equal standing, which in a court of law they have to do. But then considering that Paul Conrath is involved in the case and absolutely has connections in this world of evangelical far-right Christian fundamentalist weirdness, it is not that hard to imagine exactly how these people became involved in the case.
Indeed.
And the question should probably be raised as to whose case really was this? Was this about Keira Bell and Mrs. A? Which it may have started out being, but then look at who got involved. And look at how much of an influence it may have had on how our healthcare in the UK works. Now, the thing that needs to be said is that the Alliance Defending Freedom have a UK office in London. They call themselves Alliance Defending Freedom International.
Well, of course they do.
And ages ago, I was doing some looking up into what they do. And I found, just by Googling around for a bit, found that there has been times where they have appeared on the Register of Members' Interests for Members of Parliament, including with Fiona Bruce, who is an MP for the Conservative Party, and very big on religious freedom. These people have reach in our government,
Yes.
and the Alliance Defending Freedom in the States send over about £500,000 to their UK office every year, and nobody knows where it goes. And the Alliance Defending Freedom, their whole reason for existing, is to impose Christian fundamentalist hateful values, a hateful interpretation of Christian values, on everyone through the courts. That's why they were there at the Supreme Court last year. They tend to show up, and I would highly encourage everyone to read the report from Dignity in Dying that we will be linking to, because that gives you a broader picture on how much certain ideologues are trying to influence everything. And I think it's safe to say that I believe that is the case that's happened.
I agree.
Here, but that is a personal belief. You can't sue a person for a personal belief.
Definitely.
I'm not saying it's true. I'm saying I believe it, but I don't know for sure because I don't.
Indeed, and it's quite difficult to know for sure, isn't it? But it's also quite difficult to look at all of these connections and say, "Oh, I'm sure it's all perfectly innocent. I'm sure there's nothing to worry about here." You know, it's hard to do
Keira
that.
Bell said she's a fucking feminist and she's paying money to these people and working with these people. That's not feminist.
Yeah.
That's the exact opposite of feminism at the very least of things.
Do you know, it just reminds me of that bit in The Handmaid's Tale. Have you read it?
I've not read it. I saw the first series of the show,
okay.
but then I got too sad.
Well, yeah, as I would imagine. So I read it, I've had it a while. It's a good book. But there is a point where one of the characters remembers the revolution kind of thing that created the Republic of Gilead. And there are quote-unquote feminists siding with the far right to destroy pornography. but that was a thing. There's I've got several books about this, and
they fucking call us Gilead.
I know.
Well, I mean,
right?
Rosie Duffield MP for Labour. That was a thing we didn't report on during our hiatus. She compared us to fucking Gilead. My God, these people.
They're just it's projection, isn't it? It's Dolby CinemaScope projection. So, with all of this, and this is confusing and there's lots of legalese here and so on, but something that has come up since the 2nd of December is that there is an appeal now. So you've pulled some information about this, haven't you?
Yeah, and essentially last month, the High Court granted the appeal request, and now thankfully there is a chance that this could be overturned. But I think the things that need to be said up front, because there's a lot of people assuming this is going to be like a whole new case, a whole new review, and this appeal is going to be a rerun of what happened before. Essentially, all of the same witnesses and evidence will be presented again. However, this does offer the opportunity for interested parties to intervene in the case, much like we referenced before, where Mermaids and Stonewall tried to intervene and were rejected. This time, the Good Law Project, which Joe Maugham is the director of, has started the Trans Legal Defence Fund, which currently has about £135,000 raised, which is gosh darn incredible and awesome. And the idea of the Trans Legal Defence Fund is to basically sort of fight back through the courts. If there is a case that could be about making things better for trans people, they seem to want to get involved. And they initially announced that they were going to do a thing on the waiting times at the Tavistock, because the 18 weeks promise is laughably never ever hit. But then, obviously, the Keira Bell, Mrs. A, Tavistock judgment came down, and that kind of changed things up. But yeah, the Good Law Project supported an intervention from the Endocrine Society, an international medical organisation that specialises in endocrinology, who, interestingly, Professor Hurz is a member of.
Right.
But they don't appear to like him that much. For obvious reasons, but he is technically a member, so I think there is possibility for them to come in and be like, no, this guy.
Yeah, screw this guy.
Don't listen to this guy.
Fuck this clown.
I don't think they're going to actually say anything like that, because that's not how these things work. They're not allowed to go in there and say, yeah, fuck him.
Although,
But,
wouldn't it be great if it was?
I love the fantasy of that. But also involved is Brooke, a sexual health charity for young people, which is very relevant considering the impact of on Gillick and potentially abortion access for young people. And Gendered Intelligence, who our listeners will be very familiar with, are a charity for young trans people who do lots of awesome work. Jay Stewart is the CEO of it.
Yes, indeed.
I've actually met him a few times. He's a decent guy. Like him very much and like the work that they do. So that feels like good news. Mermaids chose not to try and intervene again, but Stonewall tried and were rejected. But we go into the reasons why in the interview with Joe. But of course, transgender trans have also been allowed to intervene again because that's fine.
Because I'm still kind of holding to my theory that someone made up their mind long before they heard any of the quote-unquote evidence presented by people like Transgender Trend. So we'll start moving towards the interview then.
Yeah, to talk more about the specifics of that, here is Jolyon Maugham QC. Hello, Jolyon Maugham. How are you doing today? You good?
I'm very well, Michelle. I'm really excited to be on your What the Trans pod. Really, really excited.
Looking back on your social media output, it appears you became very aware of trans issues around mid-2019. Did something happen to make you aware of trans issues then? Or is this something that dates back even further?
I can't remember the exact date when I began thinking about it. I remember what it was about. So there was this big kerfuffle about women-only shortlists in the Labour Party. And the whole family were on holiday in New Zealand, where I grew up. And I remember talking we all spoke about it really in the car. And I guess we began to think about what was at stake, what it meant to be a woman for the purposes of an all-woman shortlist. And I think there was just sort of coming to my attention, really, something that I now see much more frequently, which was the use of issues around trans identity by the media to drive traffic. So trans issues were thought by newspaper editors to be good copy, right? You get the clicks if you talk about trans people. And if you're a barrister, and I'm a barrister, you kind of think you know everything. And so Claire and I, my wife, talked about what issues we thought were at stake in women's only shortlists. And then I remember coming back to London and seeing that somebody actually was litigating about women only shortlists in the Labour Party. So that's when I first remember really engaging with the question.
Well, it sounds like you and your wife sort of woke up to what has been happening, as a lot of cis people I've talked to have, where usually something roughly in their world will suddenly get all trans obsessed, and that's when there's just like, oh wow, a lot of people really don't like trans people in this country. That's weird.
My journey was a bit slower than that, actually. I mean, if you are my generation or older, so I'm 49, you don't, many of us at least, don't meet anyone who's trans, or at least we don't meet anyone who we know is trans. And we're opinionated, and certainly my generation and social class think we are the sort of guardians of good sense. And so, between ourselves, we have opinions on everything. And sometimes those opinions are better informed than other times. And I didn't want to be especially rude about my own demographic. I don't suppose anyone's different. But certainly I had, and I don't think any of my friends had, or even have now really, any of the sort of long-standing circle of friends, had any real insight into the fact that for younger people, actually, gender fluidity was something that people were encountering all the time, if indeed they weren't themselves gender fluid. And so it was a kind of, it's a classic kind of generational divide, or at least so it seemed to me then.
I think there's something to the differences in the age demographics, because it's very rare for me to meet a young person who's on board with this stuff. And if you look at the demographic of the readers of a lot of the newspapers that are peddling this stuff, they tend to skew older, so there's something to that.
There's quite a lot of data actually as well. There have been a number of surveys conducted by reputable polling companies, and they show that whether you're trans positive is quite heavily a function of what generation you are. Actually, older people.
Yeah, you're probably thinking the same YouGov poll that I'm thinking of right now that was very, very stark.
Yeah, there is a YouGov poll, there's a Kantar poll, there's a British Social Attitudes survey poll. I think there are others as well. Those are the three that leap to mind. And they talk about how support for trans people splits along gender lines and along age lines and along social class lines and so on.
So the Good Lord Project has announced, long before you announced any interventions with the Bell versus Tavistock case, which we will get to, that you were going to take legal action against NHS England on behalf of an unnamed trans young person. What are the latest developments in regards to this? How's it going?
So we thought very, very long and hard about what the right initial intervention would be for this fund. We knew this was a space in which people were being, very vulnerable community was being victimized, really, by harassed, and it felt like an important space for us to be in. And we spent some time with lawyers talking around various ideas for how we might get involved. And this case, which grew from my perception that a real part, a very important part of the debate, the unhelpful debate around the use of puberty blockers in the UK was a function of the fact that the Tavistock wasn't providing a very good service, probably in large part because it was under-resourced. I thought if the Tavistock wasn't providing a good service, then people who might be supportive of puberty blockers might nevertheless have concerns about the quality of service provided by the Tavistock. And I was also sympathetic to the Tavistock, actually. Working in this space is unbelievably difficult. It's like offering abortion services in the American South. The only people who are prepared to sort of put up with the constant harassment are people who feel very strongly ideologically committed to ensuring that trans people get good healthcare. And of course, you're very, very grateful for those people. But the provision of healthcare isn't actually something that should flow from being ideologically committed. You don't need oncologists who are ideologically committed. You don't need, physiotherapists who are ideologically committed. And I don't think you need endocrinologists or psychotherapists who are ideologically committed either. You just need good people who are left to do a good job in line with the evidence. But as I say, I thought that one of the ways in which we might improve the quality of debate was ensuring that the Tavistock had more money, and indeed that there are other alternative services that you could access if you wanted puberty blockers to the Tavistock. And so we brought this case because the law says that you have to get seen by a consultant within 18 weeks of being referred by your GP, and the waiting lists are not 18 weeks, Michelle.
Yeah, they're really not.
They're 36 months, or they're 4 years, and that's particularly problematic in the case of puberty blockers because, of course, it's a bit like having an abortion. If you've got a sort of 6-month waiting list to have an abortion, that's it's effectively a denial of treatment. You pass through puberty or much of it in 3.5 years. So getting puberty blockers after 3.5 years or whatever it is wait is just completely unacceptable. So we bought the case. Legally, it is very, very powerful. It's all but unanswerable. But then the Keira Bell decision came along, and it didn't seem to us that there was much point pursuing the case at a particular moment where all you could do, where getting you through the doors of the Tavistock was no longer the most pressing problem. So I think we'll return to that litigation if we succeed in addressing the problems that the Keira Bell decision in its present form at least has created.
Things have got considerably worse over the last 2 months, so that does make sense to change focus like that. But it's good to know that you intend on going back to that, because once, hopefully, this decision is reversed at some point in the next however long it takes, and that'll be the next thing. So, getting to Bell versus Tavistock, when the judgment from the judicial review was released in December, what did you make of it? What did you make of the decision?
I was really appalled. It was the most angry actually I've ever been wearing my lawyer's hat. I've been following that case for some time. I'd been speaking to leading public law lawyers as a public law case since the case was issued, and no one thought that a judge would let the case go forward. So to bring judicial review proceedings, and that decision is a judicial review case, you need the permission of the court, and no one thought that they would get permission. And then no one thought, when they did get permission, that the case had a snowflake's chance in hell, because the points that were being made flew in the face of everything that the public lawyers that I was speaking to about the case understood about public law. The central feature of the case on the facts that so many of the people who were given puberty blockers by the Tavistock went on to have cross-sex hormones. Therefore, ran the argument, a decision whether to take puberty blockers is fundamentally a decision whether to take cross-sex hormones, and so not a decision that someone who's 10 or 11 or whatever it was should take lightly. Seems to me to be an argument that was just nonsense.
Post hoc ergo propter hoc.
Post hoc ergo propter hoc.
I have no knowledge of Latin. I literally got that from an episode of The West Wing, just so you know.
You and me both, Michelle. You did it with such confidence that I felt comfortable following in your shoes. The fact that so many kids given puberty blockers by the Tavistock go on to have cross-sex hormones is perfectly easily explained by reference to the enormously conservative prescribing practice of the Tavistock. I think what it probably shows is that the Tavistock isn't using puberty blockers correctly. It isn't using them to give breathing space to trans kids. It's using them to delay giving cross-sex hormones. So there will be lots of people who should have got puberty blockers, who should have been prescribed puberty blockers by the Tavistock, who never got them, because it's only if the Tavistock is absolutely convinced that when you're 16, you will want to take cross-sex hormones that they give you puberty blockers. And of course, that's not the purpose of puberty blockers. They're not designed to be given only to those who will have cross-sex hormones. They're designed to be given to those who may want to have cross-sex hormones later and want to avoid the physical changes that arise if you go through puberty in the gender you were assigned at birth.
There's a lot of confusion in the community when it comes to the appeal. Can you tell us a little bit about what this appeal actually is and what it isn't? That seems like a really broad question. I'll try and narrow it for you a little bit. There's some misconceptions about what this appeal actually is, in that people think that this is going to be a whole new review, when in actual fact it's going to be a redo of the review as it stood last time, yes, but with interventions now being accepted.
So the fundamental problem with the decision of the divisional court, and I'm answering your question, I'm just answering it in a slightly different way. Fundamental problem with the decision of the divisional court is that it takes a case that was about what the Tavistock was getting right and wrong and turns it into a general inquiry by a judge into whether or not someone should get puberty blockers. It turned it into a judge-led inquiry into whether or not there is value in kids before they hit puberty or whilst they're in puberty having puberty blockers. And it did it without hearing any lawyer for trans kids, without hearing any lawyer for endocrinologists. The only lawyers it heard from were for the Tavistock, which was defending its conduct, not the practice generally, from Kira Bell, and from Transgender Trend, which is a transphobic pressure group. So the judges didn't really have the basis upon which they could do what they went on to do. And the purpose of the appeal is, of course, to overturn the decision. But there's also a world in which the Court of Appeal says, all right, we do have problems with the Tavistock's practice, but the divisional court should not have said what it did about puberty blockers. It shouldn't have drawn these lines in the sand about when kids could consent to puberty blockers. There were no no trans kids before the divisional court represented to give their own view of the merits of puberty blockers before the divisional court. And so in consequence, this really, really important part of the picture is missing. There's no discussion, there's no meaningful discussion in the decision of the divisional court of the benefits of puberty blockers. There's lots of discussion of possible costs, but there's no discussion of the important benefits, which are that if you're, obviously, as your listeners will know, if you're a trans girl and you don't have puberty blockers, your voice changes. You get
I'm the living proof, because I knew I was trans at 5. I didn't even know blockers were, well, they weren't an option when I was a kid. I'm literally what happens. It's fine, I make it work, but would have been better the other way, for damn sure, yeah.
And, it's also obviously true of trans boys as well, although in different ways. If you don't have puberty blockers, if you go through puberty in the gender assigned at birth and then you do transition, then you're going to have all sorts of consequences, physical needs for surgery that might otherwise have been avoided. I mean, all of your listeners know it, but it's completely absent from the divisional court's understanding of why it's important that people have puberty blockers and why in every sort of progressive healthcare system in the world, puberty blockers are routinely prescribed, but not in England. So it's possible that the divisional court decision will be overturned in the Court of Appeal, but it's also possible it'll be affirmed in the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal may just say, well, actually, here are some things about that the Tavistock was getting wrong. But it's fine for kids to consent to taking puberty blockers. There's another possible outcome as well, and Good Law Project is pursuing not just an intervention in that case, but another piece of legal action alongside that case. So the consequence of the Tavistock decision at the moment is that because the Tavistock won't accept parental consent, and because the divisional court decision says you can't accept a child's consent either, you can have a world in which an expert doctor wants to treat and a child wants puberty blockers, and that child's parents want them to have puberty blockers. But still, you can't get puberty blockers. So you rock up before some judge who doesn't know anything about puberty blockers, doesn't know the child, isn't an expert, isn't the child's parents. And this judge, just as a matter of common sense, right, how can a judge have anything to say about that? On what basis? What's missing from an expert doctor, a loving parent, and a child that a judge can bring? I would say the answer is nothing, and it's almost unknown to the law for judges to have a role in circumstances where doctor, patient, and parent all agree on the right way forward. So we're tackling that by asking the family court to direct that the Tavistock can accept parental consent if the Tavistock can't accept a child's consent. And so what that would mean in practice is you get through the doors of the Tavistock, the doctor thinks you should have puberty blockers, the parents are supportive of the child's decision to have puberty blockers. Sorry, when I speak of a child, I'm speaking like a lawyer, that should have puberty blockers. And because the parent is happy and the doctor wants to prescribe and the child wants the puberty blockers, they can have them, even though that child might be, 11 or 12, and they don't need to go to court. So for most of the people who get through the doors of the Tavistock, i.e. those people who have supportive parents, this would provide an answer. It's not obviously a solution for particularly trans kids whose lives are particularly difficult because their parents are hostile to their gender incongruence. And we will need to do work around that, work supporting that constituency as well, if we're not able to overturn the decision of in the Bell case. So we're coming at it from two different angles, if you like. We're tackling what the court in the Bell case said about a child's ability to consent. And we're also tackling in this new case, which we issued last week, what the Tavistock said about a parent's ability to consent. And so we say, well, properly, it's the child who's receiving the treatment if they're Gillick competent, if they understand, and they should be able to consent. But even if you think that's wrong, the parent should be able to consent to treatment that the physician wants to give and the child wants to have.
Do you think it's possible that if you make it so the parent can consent, there'll be an argument somewhere that, oh, you're trying to legalise parents transing their kids or something? Like, if the kids can't give consent, but the parent and the doctor can, could that open things up? Essentially, people will say, well, now the child has no say, so they can have it imposed upon them.
Well, I think the answer to that is no. And
I'm very glad it's no.
Actually, Michelle, the answer is yes. It's yes because people will say it even though it's not true.
Oh, but yeah, forgetting that.
The true answer is it's not true because unless the child is trans, unless the psychotherapist wants to give the child puberty blockers, unless the psychotherapist at the Tavistock at the moment thinks the child is trans, should have puberty blockers, they won't want to prescribe. And so what the parent thinks is irrelevant. So in effect, what you'll have is doctor wants to prescribe, parent is happy for child to be prescribed, and child assents, so agrees, even though they can't legally consent.
There's some excitement amongst trans people with the announcement that you and the Good Law Project put out about Brooke and the Endocrine Society and Gendered Intelligence being successful, being included in the intervention. But Stonewall were also part of that as well. What made you decide on these particular organisations?
So we did select them very, very carefully. We wanted to de-dramatise, and so we didn't want a particularly campaigny trans charity. We also didn't want a trans charity that had sought to intervene below, and so we went with Gendered Intelligence. Mermaids, I have the highest regard for. I speak a lot to Louis, who's their legal director, who I think is, they're very thoughtful, very committed, very bright. I like them personally enormously. So none of this was a criticism of mermaids. Good Law Project is also not an intervener in this case because, as I say, we wanted to de-dramatise it. So that's why we ended up with Gendered Intelligence, who have a much lower profile than mermaids. The Endocrine Society is the international body of endocrinologists, i.e. people who prescribe hormones, not just to people who are trans, but also all sorts of other people who need hormones, cancer patients, those with precocious puberty, those in menopause, and so on and so on and so on. So the Endocrine Society deals with all of those different types of people who need hormones, and we decided that they would be better than WPATH because it might be said of WPATH that WPATH was somehow invested in the trans industry. Of course, I think that way of describing it is absolutely cobblers, but we were thinking very defensively. Brooke were very concerned about what the decision meant for the sexual health of children. And in particular, Brooke is very active in the abortion rights space. And I think Brooke was concerned about what the decision would mean for your ability to access abortion rights. And Stonewall is the sort of, in as much as any organisation is establishment in the LGBT space, it's Stonewall, right?
Yeah, they're the big ones, yeah. So what was the reason given by the court for not granting Stonewall permission to intervene in this appeal?
I think the court, I didn't actually attend the case management hearing. I was on another call. I think I was doing another podcast, actually. But as I understand it, the court was interested in the fact that Stonewall had sought to intervene below before the divisional court and had not been given permission. And I think that was a feature. I suppose, if you want to put yourself into the seat of the Court of Appeal, you might also wonder, well, if we have a charity that can speak for trans children like Gendered Intelligence, do we need Stonewall as well? But, all of the organisations that we have spoken to, and, there have been tweets in support by people like the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, I think that's what it's called, and others, have all been wanting to support the initiative. And there's no ego at all involved. We just want the right thing for a group of particularly disadvantaged kids. So there's no ego. Everyone, no one cares how it happens. They just want it to happen.
Do you have any explanation as to why Transgender Trend would have been granted permission to intervene in the original review that you weren't therefore working in any capacity, or subsequently again in the appeal? Because the perception is Stonewall got rejected twice, Mermaids got rejected the first time, but didn't even apply the second time. There's a perception that the court is slanted in a certain direction with letting in what many believe, including myself, believe are an active hate group?
I'm gonna answer this question carefully. We talk a lot, us lawyers, about the need for judicial diversity. And the reason we think judicial diversity is important is because we know that the law is a human instrument. We know that you bring to your practice as a lawyer and you bring to your practice as a judge your own personal experiences and your own personal prejudices. And I think that once you understand that that is true, and I think undoubtedly it is true, you are entitled to ask questions about whether the divisional court that heard the Bell case brought with it a set of prejudices about transgender kids. And my personal view is that they did bring a set of prejudices about transgender kids.
Yeah.
And I think that decision is a carbuncle, is a real moral scar on the landscape of English law. I'm deeply, deeply ashamed of it. And I say that as a Queen's Counsel. I think the decision is appalling. I started off by telling you I was going to answer carefully. But, I think it's important that people like me, who have a certain professional status because I'm a Queen's Counsel, speak clearly about what they think a court has got wrong, speak clearly about why they think a court has got it wrong, because if people like me won't do it, then who will do it?
So when it comes to the witnesses that were involved in the case, including transgender Trent, you recently made the point on social media that many of the witnesses called by the claimants in the review, and one of the solicitors representing the claimants, has ties to American far-right Christian groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom and the Heritage Foundation. How much of an impact do you believe these people may have had on the judgment? Like, I read the judgment before doing this, and was checking with the names you put out on your Twitter in that thread a while ago, which will be linked in the description. Everyone should read it. And yeah, it feels like a lot of people with some very, very alarming ties got to say whatever the hell they liked.
Well, it's chicken and egg, isn't it? If you have a court that comes at an issue from a position of prejudice, and my personal view is that the divisional court came at this issue from a position of prejudice, then you're going to allow in witnesses whose views are wildly unorthodox and are not the sort of witnesses who most independent lawyers would say represent a proper body of expert medical evidence. And you're also going to give great weight to those people because their prejudices align with your own. And I think that's what happened here. And so, it's kind of a chicken and egg situation, I think.
Final question, and it involves some run-up, but there is something of a history of cisgender people taking on trans issues because it benefits them to do so, whether that be certain journalists going anti-trans to better their career, as you mentioned earlier, or even those who go pro-trans to seek some kind of pro-LGBT brownie points before bolting when it gets tough, to be pro-trans, like certain people in the pre-Johnson government. This is a long way of saying that trans people have been burned before, and many are sceptical of cis people, any cis person, getting involved with trans issues at this point. So saying that, what would you say to trans people listening who may be sceptical about a cisgender man with privilege getting involved, and what makes you and the Good Law Project different from others that may have come before?
Well, it's not really for me to say. I'm going to do better, really. You will have to, your listeners will have to watch what we do. I think people are entitled to feel skeptical, to be honest. That which can be a political football for those outside the community, for those in the community, is, absolutely your life. It's completely existential. It's literally existential sometimes. And it's not for me to say I'm going to be different. I think all I can say is that I've now been in this space for quite some time, and I hope I'm in the space in a way that is supportive. I am having an impact. So in a couple of days' time, it will be announced that another charity has made a significant donation to the Trans Defence Fund. By having someone who is a cis male establishment figure speaking about these issues, they can be heard by different people and in different places. It's not, and forgive me, Michelle, these aren't my words, I'm ventriloquating. It's not those weirdos talking about themselves. It is instead a white, married, cis, male Queen's Counsel who is saying those things. And because of who I am, I can say them and be heard in different ways. And it's also true that I pay a very heavy personal price for my involvement in this space. Many of my own tribe, my generation, my privilege, my influence now hate me. I mean, it is just a truth. So lots of journalists who are friends of mine now hate me. They're extraordinarily rude and abusive about me. I get no benefit from that, and I get no personal, there's nothing for me in doing this work, but it is right that I do it. It's important that I do it. And as I say, if you have social capital, if you have privilege, you have to use it. You have to use it to do good. Otherwise, what are you for? You're a moral passenger. I don't want to be a moral passenger.
Jolyon, Maugham, thank you very much for talking to me today.
Really, really lovely of you to have me on, Michelle. Really, really looking forward to listening to it.
Gotta admit, I was super impressed by you knowing Latin. Check you out, scholar.
I literally did get that from a West Wing episode.
No, I know.
It's just one of the few things I remember from that show, really. Yeah, but I don't mention it in the thing, but post hoc ergo propter hoc means after, therefore, because of it is basically a really, really poncy way of saying causation, correlation, not the same.
Yeah.
Although sometimes that is true. But anyway, next week we're going to go into more on how this is affecting people on the ground. We have now covered the lofty judgments and chambers and courts and QCs and all of that world. Now we're going to go back to our roadhouse, which is people on the ground. Mm-hmm. Hopefully we're going to be talking to some trans youths. Hopefully we're going to be talking to some people who work with trans youths and can speak to what is actually happening. And hopefully we'll be able to get some word out of the Tavistock themselves, or NHS England, and figure out what the hell is going on there at the moment, because honestly, trying to find out what their current policy is not the easiest thing to do. But
indeed,
we will try and endeavour to do that for next week. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week. If you liked what you heard, you can check us out on the Twitters and the Facebooks, just / What the Trans on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. You'll be able to find us there. We also have a website, whatthetrans.com, where you can list all of this stuff. And we also have a Patreon, where you can give us money. If you want to do that, cool. We got a whole bunch of new tiers and rewards and things. And we've also launched a new show. We've been doing some
work.
Yeah, we've launched a new show. What the Trans Nights, which is basically people on a certain tier on Patreon. I think it's $7 a month. Will get access to episodes of What the Trans Nights 6 months early. These are not serious podcasts. No. They are not time sensitive. They do not contain any relevant information to anybody's lives. It is essentially just me and Ashleigh at the end of a long, hard day of reading horrible things, talking about the weirdest shit we can.
Yes. For funsies, because we've been speaking to people while we're on hiatus, and sometimes we do focus on a little too much, perhaps, on the depressing. We even have a segment named Terrible News, which is kind of seems like it could be leading people in a certain direction. So that's something that we're having a think about. It
started as a joke.
It did start as a joke.
And then the news did get terrible.
It really got terrible, didn't it? But nevertheless, that's something that we're thinking about. We're thinking about a few things. We are back, but we're also looking to try and take this podcast forward, develop it a little more, and make it make it something that's really good, it's really useful. And obviously supporting us on Patreon is a very, very valid and appreciated way for you to do that.
But if you can't or don't want to, that's fine, because
Absolutely.
What the Trans Nights episodes will be released like 6 months after.
Yeah.
So everyone will get them. You will get What the Trans Nights for free eventually. Just, yeah. That's just the nature of the business, nature of the podcasting game.
So is. I do quite like the fact that we can call What the Trans Nights, like we can say WTTN, and it makes it sound like we're a small local radio station in Iowa or something.
It is cool, yeah.
Yeah. You're listening to WTTN. Yeah. But for now, we shall be saying our goodbyes. Thank you very much for listening.
Take care. Speak to you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This episode of What the Trans was written, produced, and everything else by Michelle Snow and Ashley Talbot, and was edited by Michelle Snow.
And a big thank you to all of our Patreon supporters, who are Gordon Cameron,
Peter Kimball,
Rachel T.S.,
Constance Turner,
Vic Parsons,
Joel Lewis,
Tila Wild,
Atom James,
Vanessa Billington,
Tower Watch,
Rowan Littlejohns,
Desiree Markland,
Patreon user,
Derek Victor,
Sarah Bedful of Dogs Halliwell,
Emma Doyle,
Mike Dickinson,
Owen Willis,
Catherine,
Elliot McVeigh,
Cassius Adair,
Tuck,
Melissa Brooks,
Ian Cumber,
Maddie Bell,
Karakan 12,
April Heller,
Sophie Lewis,
Alexandra Lilly,
Claire Scott,
Ariadne Pena,
Lauren O'Nions,
Matt Reynolds,
Berners Pink Jelly Bean.
and Lanus. Thank you to all of you, and we will see you soon.